The case began as a routine search in the remote Ural Mountains, where 9 experienced hikers had vanished without warning. When rescuers found their campsite, one detail stood out immediately. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Not unzipped, slashed. There were no signs of struggle, only scattered footprints, some barefoot, leading away into the freezing darkness. They were trained, prepared, yet something had made all of them abandon safety and step into the night. What happened there didn't start with chaos. It started with a decision. The first thing that stood out wasn't the tent itself, but the way it had been opened. It lay half buried under snow on the slope, the fabric stiff and stretched, as if something inside had pushed outward with urgency. The cuts along the side weren't made from the outside. The slashes were jagged, uneven, and clearly done from within. Whoever had been inside hadn't tried to unzip the entrance. They had chosen to tear their way out. By the time the search team reached it, the wind had already started covering their tracks, but not completely. There were footprints leading away from the tent, scattered and inconsistent, some barefoot, some in socks, some in a single boot. They all moved downhill, away from shelter, into the open darkness of the mountain. The group had been experienced. That was the detail everyone kept repeating, as if saying it enough times would make the scene less confusing. 9 hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, all trained, all familiar with harsh conditions. They had planned the route carefully, documented their journey, and sent regular updates before disappearing. Nothing about them suggested panic, but the tent suggested otherwise. The timeline, once reconstructed, showed that they had set up camp on a slope of the mountain late in the evening. It wasn't an ideal location, but it wasn't reckless either. The weather had been harsh, but manageable. They had eaten, written in their journals, and settled in for the night. At some point after midnight, something changed. The footprints told part of the story. They showed that the group had left together, not in a chaotic stampede, but in a hurried, deliberate movement. There was no sign of a struggle inside the tent, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of an attack. They had simply decided to leave, without proper clothing, without boots, without supplies. The search teams followed the trail downhill, where the first bodies were found near a line of trees. 2 of them were lying close to what remained of a small fire. The branches above showed signs of being broken, as if someone had climbed up to get a better view or escape something on the ground. The bodies were partially clothed, their hands and feet showing clear signs of frostbite. Their skin was damaged, but there were no external injuries suggesting violence. It looked like they had simply frozen, but the position of their bodies didn't feel passive. One of them had his hands positioned as if he had been gripping something. The other seemed turned toward the slope, not away from it, as if they had been watching. Further up the slope, 3 more bodies were discovered. They appeared to have been trying to return to the tent. Their formation was uneven, one collapsing before the other, each a few meters apart. It gave the impression of effort, of resistance, of trying to push through exhaustion or fear. They hadn't made it. The remaining 4 took longer to find. When they were eventually located, they were buried under a layer of snow in a small ravine. Unlike the others, their injuries were different. Severe. One had a fractured skull. Another had multiple broken ribs, the kind of damage usually seen in high-impact accidents. Yet there were no external wounds matching the force required to cause such injuries. No bruising in the usual sense. No cuts, just internal destruction. One of them was missing her tongue. That detail spread quickly, becoming the centerpiece of speculation. But the medical reports would later suggest that the tongue had likely been lost due to natural decomposition and scavenging in the harsh environment. Still, it added to the unease, because nothing else fit cleanly. There were no signs of an avalanche strong enough to justify such panic. The tent wasn't buried deeply enough. The slope didn't show the kind of disturbance expected from a major slide. And even if there had been one, experienced hikers would not have fled in that manner. Without boots, without gear. Some theories suggested military involvement. Others pointed to rare natural phenomena, like infrasound causing irrational fear. A few leaned into more extreme ideas, things that couldn't be tested or proven. But the most grounded explanation came from a combination of smaller, less dramatic factors. A minor snow slab, not a full avalanche, may have shifted under the tent, creating a sudden sense of instability. The group, fearing a larger collapse, cut their way out quickly instead of using the entrance, which might have been blocked or too slow to access. In that moment, their decision made sense. They moved downhill to create distance from the slope, intending to return once the danger passed. But the conditions were worse than expected. The temperature dropped rapidly. Visibility was low. Wind made orientation difficult. In the darkness, the distance between the tent and the tree line became disorienting. They reached the trees, but by then, the cold had already begun affecting their judgment. Hypothermia doesn't always present as quiet weakness. It can cause confusion, irrational decisions, even a strange sense of calm or urgency. People begin to act against their own survival instincts. The small fire suggested they tried to stabilize. Some attempted to climb trees, possibly to locate the tent. Others decided to head back uphill. They separated. That separation likely led to the different outcomes. Those near the fire succumbed first. The ones who tried to return to the tent collapsed along the way. The last group, seeking better shelter in the ravine, may have fallen or slipped into it, sustaining the severe injuries found later. The force required for those injuries could be explained by the fall combined with the weight of snow accumulating above them. Piece by piece, it formed a picture that didn't rely on anything supernatural or unknown. It was a series of human decisions, influenced by fear, environment, and physical limits. But even with that explanation, something about the case refused to settle completely. Because of one detail that wasn't immediately obvious. The footprints. They showed that the group left the tent together. Not in chaos, not in a desperate scramble, but in a controlled line, as if they were following a shared understanding. That part was always emphasized. What wasn't emphasized as much was the spacing. The distance between the footprints suggested that they weren't just moving together. They were keeping distance from each other. Not close enough to help. Not far enough to be separate. Just enough space, consistent across multiple tracks, as if each person was aware of something that required them to stay apart. That behavior didn't match panic from an avalanche. It didn't match disorientation. It suggested caution. The kind of caution people show when they believe something among them is dangerous. There was no record of conflict within the group before that night. No signs of aggression or tension. Their journals were normal, even lighthearted at times. But hypothermia can change behavior quickly. In extreme cold, the brain begins to malfunction. People can become paranoid, confused, even aggressive. There have been documented cases where individuals believed their companions were threats, reacting in ways that didn't align with reality. If one person began behaving unpredictably, the others might have responded by creating distance, trying to manage the situation without escalating it. That would explain the spacing. It would also explain why they left together, but not closely. And if that behavior escalated further, it could explain the injuries in the ravine. Not from an external force, but from a fall during a struggle or attempt to restrain someone who was no longer acting rationally. There was no clear evidence of that in the reports. But there didn't need to be, because the environment would have erased most of it. In the end, the case wasn't about something unknown or unexplainable. It was about how quickly control can slip away. A minor shift in the snow, a moment of fear, a series of decisions made under pressure, and a mind pushed just far enough by cold and exhaustion to stop recognizing the people it once trusted. The mountain didn't need to do anything extraordinary. It only needed to wait.